Oh, there once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree, and he sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. Who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me? Who'll come a waltzing Matilda, my darling? Who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me? Waltzing Matilda and leading a water bag. Who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Luks here at the Crossroads, and we've got an extra special guest today from Victoria. We've got Lou Cook. Welcome, Lou Cook.
Hello, Arnie.
That's it. And from South
And
Australia.
Betty.
That's it. From South Australia, we've got Betty Luks. Welcome, Betty.
Thank you, Annie. Good morning, everyone.
Okay. Now, we're going to continue on our theme, the individual. The last few recordings we've done is about policy and administration. Policy and administration. And where policy is meant to originate from, if we're a free people, the policy comes from the individual. They pursue policies that interests them, that affects them directly, and that they have first-hand experience of the consequences of the policy. Now, when you've got a technocrat, a bureaucrat, a fascist, or whatever, the dictator in charge, and policy comes from basically the administration, in one form or another. Ultimately, the administration, of course, they're detached. Those people who initiate that policy, they're detached from the consequences of it, the outworking of it. It's most important when you consider that if you're to maintain your freedom, you've got to participate. And that really is what today's session is about. It's about accepting responsibility and participation. And so I'd like to give the floor to Betty just to present her opening salvos on this policy and administration, the individual responsibility.
Thank you, Arnie. I just want to begin by stating what I understand we're talking about when we talk of policy. A policy stems from a philosophy, and philosophy was once known as the love of wisdom. So there needs to be some wisdom in what you understand is your philosophy. And we were asked just recently to give a summary of what is social credit, which is the basis of what we're about. And I thought about that. No, you can't sum it up in just a small report, brief report. But if I say that it is the practical application of the Christian philosophy, that won't make sense to a lot of people. But we'll have to begin there. It's the philosophy is the love of wisdom, and surely it has to be what over the last 2,000 years we have understood to be the love of wisdom, or the philosophy of the Christian religion.
Thanks, Betty. Thanks, Betty. That's right. That's exactly right. If we're going to do anything in regard to how we live, we're going to have a set of beliefs or love of wisdom, and those beliefs has got to be the practical outworking of it. It can't just be a utopian concept that's not demonstratable, but it's actually what works. And we've got to look very hard at times to see, well, what actually does work, what doesn't work, and how do things work better. And the fact is, our world is not perfect. Our world is a wonderful world, and it's up to us to actually pursue knowledge, pursue understanding of that world and how things work, and then pursue policy based on what works well. So yes, interesting. All right, Lou Cook, you're up.
Thanks, Arnie. This business of philosophy and on the Christian, from a Christian point of view, on always sort of come back to what Eric Butler, when he did his talk, is the word enough? And one of the things he mentioned was the last verse in the Gospel of John. that says something to the effect that all that Jesus did and said was not recorded, for if it was, there would be not enough room in the whole world to contain the books therein, which I think is absolutely wonderful, because only God would have that knowledge. And it opens the way for us. It means there is so much more to learn. We'll never know it all, so we must continue exploring, looking, and adapting. What we learn is sort of new truths. That's pretty hard when you go out there, when you've got the opposite being thrust at you from every direction. And so often you come to, we look at things, well, policy.
I'll just jump in here, Lou, because I can hear some background noises there, and I think that where you're going on this is very important, because as a human being, I know that I have limitations. I certainly have a natural ceiling on my depth of thinking, and I look at trying to harness things. I mean, even if it's just building a chook pen, I look at try and harness natural law, available materials, location. How do the birds roost? How are they going to be comfortable? I want to access to get my eggs. I want whatever. And I'm looking at things as to how they work. And so I pursue building a chook pen. And as it turned out, I'd looked to a point of, when I would describe it, I think Jordan Peterson's words are pretty good on this. He says it's true enough. It's true enough. It's not perfectly true, but it's true enough for us to get by. So building the chook pen, the methods that I used, the insight that I was attempting to come to grips with, the behavioural patterns of chooks and things like that. And so I made their life pretty comfortable, because they've got perches, they've got ground, the litter goes down, they can still scratch in amongst it if the bugs come in to yield the bugs. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually looking at the natural world, and I'm attempting to enhance the environment, or at least contain the environment with the natural world, adhering to the rules. And so on the basis of adhering to the rules, then I can move forward and build a chook pen. And so it is with every other part of life. We actually look for the truth of things. We look for the canon in how you do things. And based on that, it's we're able to build things, we're able to pursue things. And so it is with people, how people get on. It doesn't stop. There is really no limitation on where we can think on these things. All right, I'm just going to hand it back to Betty for a little while. Betty.
Yes, I think it won't hurt us to dwell on this discussion about philosophy and policy. And it seems to me that what we've got to understand is that in the policy is the spirit or the intent or purpose of the philosophy. And that's where the policy stems from. And there's, for the last 2,000 years, the Christian philosophy has had a great influence on the Western world. What I see happened back there 2,000 years ago is that the ancient pyramidal structure of power was decentralized. It was distributed. Power was distributed to back as far as possible to the local area, and then the community area, and then the state or the nation, as we call it. And these ideas came out of the teaching that is in the gospel, in the New Testament. And it's worthwhile having a look at some of what I'll call the headings that come out of the New Testament. For instance, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And the Sabbath, of course, was the institutionalized day that that the Jewish people would have as their Sabbath, which I understand was the Saturday. When Christianity became stronger, then what was institutionalized was the Sunday, and the Western world practiced that for many years. We're told that out of the heart the mouth speaks. And of course, out of the heart to me means the inner man, that which is the spirit of man. And when it comes to the economic system, well, we were told that the rain falls on the just and the unjust, that the produce of the earth are for all mankind. But it's a matter of how it's distributed that we have to look at, because that's where governments come in.
Just let me jump in on that, Betty, and I think that you're covering some good ground. You've also covered a few different topics in that. Policy and administration, responsibility, and the individual. And coming back to the Christian faith, you can see that the Christian faith has got many, many facets to it. It is not limited to just one particular point of view of how to build a chookyard. It's also, it covers every area of life. And I know that the fathers, the ancients, when they produced, if you like, they brought the New Testament together. They called it the canon. That the books are consistent in their presentation, and they reveal how God is. And I think that's absolutely fascinating that we look at that. And the thing is, it's in that pursuit of knowledge, of wisdom, of our philosophy, that we're able to actually not deconstruct, but rather construct. We actually take things apart in order to look at them, but then put them back together in order to put them into a form that's we can actually manage, we can associate, we can work together on. Luke Cook, I'm going to give you the floor and see what you've got to say on this matter.
Well, Arnie, I might find myself having a bit of a difference of opinion on some of this.
Excellent.
But first of all, what we're talking about is power, the use and misuse of power. And I think Christianity has given us directions in the proper use of power for our own, well, shall we say, happiness, and living a life that's that will give us the most fulfillment. Now, it's a battle that's been going on, obviously, since all time. And it also, we really need to understand this use of power, and our own, and it goes right through. Our constitution is involved with power, how it's used. Everything we do from each day has power in it somewhere. Our own power against the power of the state. And it's difficult to manage it. It's certainly difficult to manage the people that are wielding the power against us. And I recall something that David Mitchell said: if you're going to stand up against the state, he said, what are you going to do if the sheriff turns up with his team of men? See, you're going to have quite a battle on your hands. So you've either got to acquiesce or you'll be sacrificed. This is important to sort of follow up how the power is used. It's no good quoting the Constitution or any other written piece of paper unless you've got the means of applying the sanctions on your own behalf. Otherwise, you're going to lose out.
Thanks,
and we've got to learn a new way to fight.
Thanks for that, Lou. I think that's exactly right. Notice that Betty's ready to jump in, and so I'm going to give her the floor, Betty.
I just want to finish those headings that I was
Yep.
talking about, because it's where it's going to lead. Another one that we were told is that he that is greatest must be the servant of all. And that's what we have forgotten about, that I can see. What has happened is that we have become the servant and the governments the masters, and we have to change that. Now, before this session, we were talking about the Y2K, what happened back then when we went into the new millennium, and how there was the concern about the power failing, about computers failing. And Lou spoke about, in his area of teaching, in his, what do you call it, gun association or rifle club, whatever it is, and how he encouraged the young to get themselves into a position where they were more self-reliant. Would you like to describe that again, Lou?
Just before I cut to Lou, I'll drive it, but yes, I will cut to Lou. You're up, Lou.
Right?
Yeah.
Right, I'll see if I can get you on my screen. The story was that I'd coached a couple of these kids, and we came off the range, and I'd coached a couple of these kids, and then I went and had my turn at shooting, and then when I came out, these kids were talking about shooting, and I turned around and I said to one of them, do you know how to improve your shooting and make a good fist of it? And of course they, oh yeah, and I said, right. I said, the first thing you've got to do is when you get out of bed in the morning, go and have a wash, brush your hair, clean yourself up, then go and make your bed. And in general, start the day in a good manner. Anyway, one of these kids had evil smelling boots on. They'd never been clean, smelt like he'd walked through a piggery. And I turned round to him and I said, for goodness sake, clean your boots. Anyway, there was a few other people there and they sort of listened. And his mother said he'll never do it. The next week when I go in there, I'm a bit late, and they tell me he was walking around, hoping I'd be there. He had cleaned his boots. And what's more, a few weeks later, one of the senior members said to me, and I've cleaned my boots. So it's infectious, and you can do it in good humour and encourage these people. They've got to start with themselves. In actual fact, as far as I'm concerned, all improvement starts up here, and take it from there. Tom Fielder told a similar story of when he was in a prison camp. It was a disease-ridden, smelly mess, and Tom and his other Australian, and they were the only English-speaking people in the camp. They cleaned up their little bit and made it probably much safer to live in anyway. And he said, and then it didn't take long, and other people did the same thing. And finally, the whole hut was clean. Now, these are things where one person gives an example and others follow. And I think we've got that message, and we need to apply it in our own lives.
Thanks, Lou. Thank you very much for that. That's you've covered some very good ground there about personal responsibility, hygiene. I mean, Peterson talks about if you like, the restoration of order from chaos comes from tidying up your own room. Now, I know that Betty's eager to continue on, seeing as she asked Lou to retouch on that subject that he presented. Betty.
Yes, well, thank you, Arnie. This reminded me of a meeting that was held in Victoria, and I remember that Lou was at that meeting, and it had to have been before the year 2000, because what was the topic everywhere in the mainstream media in particular was, what if the computers fail when we go to the new millennium? And there was, when I look back on it, I think it was a scare campaign to just see what the public would do. But that's not the point. The point is that what I did was to put it to the meeting. It was in a home, and I put it to the folk there. What would you do if tomorrow or tonight the electricity went off and may not be on for quite a few weeks? How would you survive? And it was just so interesting. I'm going to get Lou to talk about what he spoke about, but I just want to make the point that when you listen to what the different people would do, it was the country people who were much more self-reliant and resilient than the city people. And
Excellent. Thanks, Betty. Thank you for that. And that's exactly right. That the practical people, and I think you label them as country people, but I would relabel them and say practical people. Those people who are dealing with their own gardens, with their own home, their own maintenance, their own cars, their own everything. There's every likelihood that they've got a much better chance of processing a situation where you lose computers and power, freezers, fridges, certainly mobile phones, and all the like, and you can still survive. I remember hearing once from a fella, and it was somewhere like Bulgaria. I don't know what nation it was, but the article started, "I've just spent the last year. There is no power. There is no running water. There is no telephone. There is no public transport, nor trains, nor anything. And I've got through this 1 year." And it was a very interesting article of how he had to be so resourceful just in order to survive. And the thing is that and I'll just touch on this and I'll give it to you, Lou, the medium density housing, which I mentioned the other day. Now, if you've got people living in chicken coops where they don't even have enough land to scratch some sort of meagre existence, if they don't, then they can't even plant fruit trees. You know, fruit trees are a very big part of, in our home, a very big part of our stable food source, our fruit trees. And you think about it, okay, there's apiarists out there, they harvest honey, and you would do well to have a beehive. You know, you would do well to, in your communities, to consider having common growing areas where you can actually get it growing and work together. Because under duress, this is what you fall back on. You fall back on who you are, your immediate family, and as it becomes, and only as it becomes necessary, you fall back to your neighbours. Lou Cook.
Thanks, Arnie. I sort of vaguely remember talking about these things, Betty, but I can't, for the life of me, think exactly what it was. My brain's going. But first of all, the millennium bug didn't worry me too much because I sort of generally take the idea that, well, what do we do tomorrow? And people, they discuss these problems and then they generally just discuss them and talk around in circles and say, what do we do tomorrow? Now, in the case you mentioned, we just look for the basics that we need. We need shelter, and I'm trying to think. The three basic necessities.
Food, clothing,
we need.
shelter. Food, clothing, shelter.
Yes. Now, and you mentioned your trees. Well, if it got as bad as you just said, you're going to need a gun as well. You're going to need an army. I'm not joking. If you live close to a big population, that today, it's not like in the Depression years, people had a bit more feeling for one another. Today, I think a lot of this respect has been eroded. And if we get to the stage where we've already seen, you've got these gangs roaming around Melbourne, they've got no respect. So if the food was suddenly taken off the shelves, and that, the only good part about it is that at least they wouldn't be able to use public transport. That'd be non-existent. They could probably get hold of a car that would take them 200 kilometres. So nobody would be safe within a range of a couple hundred kilometres of any city. It's pretty terrible to contemplate what would happen.
I agree, Lou. Thank you for that. And I'm just gonna re-establish our credentials for today. What we're attempting to illustrate in this discussion, it's based on a perception, certainly a perception that I have of the individual looking to someone else to sort out their problem. Now, I'll give you two illustrations. One is in the last 5 years or so with this climate issue. Christopher Monckton stood up, Lord Christopher Monckton. He stood up as being the leader amongst the dissenters. We don't believe in climate change and we can demonstrate that it's not real. That's fine. But the trouble is, when you've got such a prominent figure like that, you put your trust in them instead of doing what you need to do. And so what happens is he just has to, the power in a sense, the authority goes to him and he just has to be undone, and that's the end of it. Then momentum is lost. If you have a favourite politician, we've got elections this Saturday, and 25% of South Australia put their faith in a man called Xenophon. And I don't believe, in my view, he hasn't produced the goods. And I think he's going to get hammered this election. He hasn't produced the goods. They put their faith in him. Now, the fact is they're going to look at other alternatives and they're going to put their faith in them. But that is not the answer. Now, we're looking at a recent phenomenon in the last 18 months of this Professor Jordan Peterson. And he's talking about restoring order from chaos. And I think his credibility is certainly there. I think his commitment is there. But I am cautious of people who put all of their faith in him, because he's only one man. Yes, there is a team behind him, but because he is only one man, he is exposed to so much pressure, and he can be blindsided by people around him who may be committed, but they don't necessarily see the whole picture. And the fact is, you can't hand that power over to someone else when it's your responsibility. So when we talk about policy, administration coming from the individual rather than the bureaucrat, it means that you actually have to take your hands off from under your seat, and you've actually got to put your hands to the wheel or to the plough or whatever it is, take up your burden and try and work this thing through, this thing called civilization. If the electrical grid fails, Jordan Peterson is not going to help you. Christopher Monckton's not going to help you, neither is the Xenophon man. You have to help you. And the fact is, the sooner you start helping you, the better, because then it puts you and your immediate family in a stronger position. Is your larder full? Are your fruit trees planted? Do you have a contingency plan for long-term supply of water if the water system, South Africa is running out of water? Now these are all heroes that were presented by the media. This Nelson Mandela fellow and others. These were heroes who were going to bring about some golden age. Well, right now South Africa is running out of water. And what are they going to do? Well, the people are they're going to die. And that's crazy. Absolutely crazy. You cannot hand responsibility over to some superman, superwoman, super person. You've got to accept responsibility for yourself and for your family. It's not easy, but this life is not, it's not there to be easy. It's there to be a challenge. And I think it's a wonderful life. Accept your challenge and have a go. I'm going to give it to you in just 2 seconds, Betty. It's just, my wife watched, I didn't because I was getting annoyed at it, the Pilgrim's Progress last night. And in the Pilgrim's Progress, the pilgrim carried a burden. And I know that Christianity talks about that my burden is light, my yoke is easy, but at the same time there's still, you look at Christ on the cross, that was not easy. That was not easy. That took every single bit that he had, every bit of suffering That's the symbol of Christianity. Don't get confused. It's not fairies in the garden. It's a tough world, and you've got to rise to it and accept your cross. Betty.
Well, I'm so busy listening to you, Arnie, I lose my train of thought. I just want to make a point about that meeting that we held that time in Victoria, but it was not just in Victoria I held that meeting, because I was interested how the different groups responded to that challenge. And here in South Australia, there was one meeting where a Hungarian chap, naturalised Australian, but from Hungary, who had lived under communism. And he was quite amused by some of the responses that he got from the city dwellers who have lived in this free country and have no idea what it's like to live under an oppressive state such as was in Hungary at the time. And as an example, he said, well, if you're going to save your food, what you've got to make sure you do is grains, for instance, that you want to save. You get you call them 40-gallon drums, or I've forgotten, but the large drums, you get them and you make them so that food can go in it, and you put your grain in, but then you cover it with sand, because it's not to, you've got to realize there'll be the hungry hordes out there who will soon want to take what you have because they're hungry. And the city people are not used to storing food. They're not used to living in a self-reliant manner for weeks at a time as country people or people of the outback are. And this was quite a shock to a lot of people. They imagined that they could go and do a deal with their neighbour. Well, the neighbour may only have enough for his own family. So it's not quite the situation, and it's not quite the human nature that you imagine it is. And that's what I find with this whole question. Do you think if we had an international government, if we had a communist government, that it would be benign and loving and benevolent towards you? I don't think so. And if you have any thought of being independent-minded, then you better think again.
Thanks, Betty. Thank you. It's a very good practical response to a difficult question. Personal responsibility, accountability, but what we're talking about, a big part of what we're talking about today, is self-reliance. You've got to be able to rely on yourself and your immediate family. And the fact is that when you talk about policy and administration, what is your first policy? It's to have food and water. That's your first policy. You've got to survive. And your second policy is, well, I've got to keep warm. And the third policy, I need to have a roof over my head. Food, clothing, shelter. These are vital parts of what you need. Oh, it'll never get to that. You go and ask the South Africans. Go and ask the Argentinians. The Argentinians are running out of, what are they running out of? Food. Now there's your socialist government there, collectivist government. They should have spent the time making people independent, giving them some land so they could work it themselves, and then at least they could feed themselves under duress. But when you put them in chicken coops, they got no chance. And that's why I'm vigorously opposed to what they call sustainable development, because the only thing they've got about sustainable is they'll put the people in human chicken coops. And it's sustainable, all right. You'll be completely reliant on the state for your food, and then you won't dare jump out of the box. Lou Cook.
Yes, Arnie, and thanks, Betty. That's I'd go one step further though. Not everybody has an acre of ground, or even half an acre of ground, to grow their own food and look after their own interests. And you've also got, as Arnie touched on, the possibility of others coming and helping themselves. This has got to be done on a community-wide program sort of thing. it probably starts with the individual making them, setting themselves up so they can survive. But they've got to share the knowledge, because the more people that can survive like you without fighting and being predators, the more chance you've got of surviving on your own. So it starts at the individual, but it's got to go out a lot further. And I often tell people the best thing you can do is have a barbecue in your street and get all the people together and talk about these things. What can you do to help one another? And I think you really, it takes a bit of leadership. It takes a bit of courage to do those things. Not everybody has is able or willing to do those things. And there's only, as I understand it, there's only probably 6 or 8% of people in any community that actually give leadership. The rest just follow. Something worth thinking about.
That's it. Thank you, Lou. That's exactly right. That it only takes a small percentage, and don't ever think of numbers here. You just think of just resolve. That I play around with bees sometimes, and you tell me what harassment one cranky bee can do to a human being. Now you 50,000 in a hive. A hive is smaller than my head, and so we're looking at 20 times that, or at least 10 times that, 500,000 bees. So there's 500,000 bees to one of me. And I'm telling you, one cranky bee, determined, resolved, can drive me to distraction. And I think that's very important. It's tenacity, perseverance, and all those sorts of virtues. I call them virtues. It's toughness. It's resolve to work difficult things through. Betty Luks.
I think we've also got to look at the fact that the policies that are being imposed upon us are not for us to be self-reliant, and not even for government to do the right thing for its people. Because wherever you look, I'm thinking of this climate change policy, for instance. And I've always been skeptical of it. When they talk about, say, the soil eroding, being eroded, or something like that, that I understand when they treat the soil like they're mining it instead of nurturing it. I understand that side of it, and I can see that production could go down, not because of climate change, but because of the poor management of the soil. That's a different matter altogether. But I just see, for instance, the grid system, and as you pointed out, I think it was Arnie, that it was Lenin who had the idea of the electrical grid system. That is for power. That is for control. That is not for the benefit of the people. And I really would find it interesting to see the figures as to how much electricity is wasted before it gets to its final destination. But the governments are still pursuing it. They're still pursuing it in the stated belief that it's because of climate change that they have to do something about it. But the systems are becoming unreliable, more unreliable than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And how easy it is to just switch off the system.
Thanks for that, Betty. And I was in power, or at least we had power generation units within the oil and gas industry that I worked in. And I can tell you that a very efficient boiler generates steam in order to run a turbine, will run at about 82% efficient. And then you've got the alternator hanging off the back of the turbine. Now bear in mind that the efficiency of the turbine might be down to converting that steam energy to 35%. All right, so far you've gone from 100%, That's the energy that's in the fuel, to 82% for the boiler, and then down to 35%. So it's only a third of 82%. And you're saying, okay, that's at the point of power generation. Now you can have a gas turbine, and it might be interesting because the numbers may be up on the gas at that point on a gas turbine, but you've still got the alternator coming off the back end. Now that's at the point of power generation. Now, electrical lines, transmission lines, without insulation, they lose power. They lose power. And so, yes, having a grid system is enormously inefficient. You would do well to have a localized energy source, and that's where the coal pits come into it, because if you've got a coal pit and you run it there and you generate power there and it's for the local industry, you won't get more efficient than that. I don't care how big they are. You bring something from Sydney to Adelaide, it's absurd to think that there's an efficiency, and it's got nothing to do with efficiency, not energy efficiency. It's got to do with control. And the thing is that when we talk policy and administration, you pursue policies like this, it's about control. It's about controlling the individual. When it comes from the top down, there's only one point of view, and that is for the people in power, for the bureaucrats in charge. And I said it the other day, if you follow the bureaucracy through, ultimately always at the top of all of the bureaucracies are the central bankers. Not the local branch manager. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about central bankers, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, things like this, these huge conglomerates where they actually issue credit to nations. And our first video, of course, was on about money creation in the modern economy, substantiated directly from the Bank of England as to how they do it. And the fact is that these things could happen quite easily, could happen locally, and the people could be represented in what industry that they wanted in their community to build the things that they wanted, generate power in their community so that they can control it. If someone wants to go on strike, well, let them go on strike, but we've got the community running this and we'll manage it. It's just you can't be blackmailed. I think these are very important points, because this is strategy and tactics, if you like, of how to restore your freedom. You've got to think about all of the ramifications of all these things. It's not just a simple, okay, I'm going to put an X on this box, and it happens in this election this Saturday. It may be for Mr. X, and good luck to him if it is. But the point is, will he sort these problems out for you? Sorry, not happening. It comes back to you. You've got to accept responsibility and start taking charge of what is your part of ship and start driving it yourself, even if you're making errors. Better you make errors and learn than hand it to someone else and they make errors that affect grossly enormous numbers. Lou Cook.
Both of the things, you both touched on aspects of power, and I don't, the climate change business, it's a political instrument to just control people. Now, the power grid, getting your power off the grid, I don't see that as a problem. It's how the people controlling it, and that's why I don't like smart meters. They can turn the power off to any individual that's not complying with their wishes. So it's not the system as such, it's how it is managed in regard to the individual getting access to these things. And we need to be, I think we need to be careful there that we see it as a power grab, and somehow we've got to counter that. Look, I'm not too sure. I'll hand over to someone else. I need to think more about it. I've making a few notes here, but I'm not sure that they're making sense to me now.
Thanks, Lou. Thank you very much for that. We all have a bit of brain fade at times, because what we're doing is we're actually deeply thinking these things through. This forum is not scripted. It's not choreographed. We're actually presenting the subject in front of you and we're discussing it. And at times it's okay. We've had to have pre-thought some things through, but they're certainly not choreographed in the sense of a script. And so while we have tended to drift into the area of self-reliance and autonomy, the fact is we are social beings, and we have neighbours and we have friends, and in the very nature of things as such is that we enjoy company. I know that I can't survive without company. I love company. I love someone around, and just to bounce ideas and to help keep me sane. And I think it's probably a good way to do it. But the thing is that under duress, when you are under duress, is how do you actually resist what Because I say to you sincerely that what's coming at us needs to be resisted. This centralised power, these Qantas at the moment, what is basically corporate fascism. You will speak this way, you will think this way, you will act this way. Well, this bloke, I don't care about his sexual preferences. That's his own business. I couldn't care less about it, but I do care about him imposing his perceived view of how I should think on me. I do object to that, and I object to him having the power, perceived power, at least in his own mind, that he's got the authority to project his point of view over his staff. That to me is wickedness. Now, Betty Luks.
As far as his policies go, yes, because they quite at odds with how I understand that this nation was built up. It was built up by the people themselves, agreeing and helping one another and working with one another. And what I do know and understand about corporations, they have drawn on what others did before them, what others built up before them, and they have drawn on what is really the community assets to build up their corporations, and along with the power of the banking system, the financial system, to create credit out of nothing. That is quite different. Mr. Joyce might have the responsibility and accountability to his shareholders to run his business in an orderly way, but he certainly does not have the power to tell people what to think and what to say. And
thanks for that, Betty. Yep, I agree with you, and that was the point, that him having the position of power, at least in his own mind, of power over other people. This is the area of corruption that's there, and it corrupts all individuals given sufficient power. I'm not suggesting what he's doing is illegal. What I'm suggesting is that the power is corrupting him as a human being. Lou Cook.
That's interesting. First of all, the airline industry is regulated by the government, and Qantas in particular was built up by Australians, I thought for all Australians. Now, I'm pretty sure at some stage this fellow actually was going to ban someone from flying on his airline because he didn't agree with their ideas on living. And I think that's, as Arnie said, that is an absolute abuse of corporate power. That he's used that power to pick on an individual. I'm not sure whether it was the fellow that hit him in the face with a meat pie, but he certainly was going to ban someone from travelling on his airline. And I think that is just going beyond the pale. Anyway, over.
Thanks, Lou. And it's all part of the conversation. We're talking about the individual, policy and administration. And in this we're talking about the responsibility that vests with the individual to manage his own life. He has to consider his neighbour. Only do unto him what you'd have him do unto you. I mean, those were Christ's words. Peterson puts it in a fashion that consider what you're doing now. Is it good for you now? Is it good for you in a week, in a month, in a year? Is it good for you? Is it good for your friends and neighbours in a week, in a month, in a year? It's saying exactly the same thing. Only do to your neighbour what you would want your neighbour to do to you. And this to me is where we're talking about the Christian faith. We're unapologetically Christian. But what we are is we are dissecting what the Bible teaches us, dissecting in order to look at it so that we can look at it in its component form and then bring it back into society, which is how it actually outworks. And so what does it mean? It means that we've got to always consider that we are social beings, and the ramifications of what we do affects more than just our immediate self. Now, Betty Luks.
I was thinking of the fact that we are social beings, and as social beings, those who went before us built up this nation, built its roads, its sewage, its electricity, and we are the inheritors of all of this, what would I say, national capital. And it's not the Joyces of the corporate state who are they're part inheritors, but they're only part inheritors. And I've thought about this. I've thought about the fact that I was thinking of Bill Gates. In fact, when I was thinking, I'm not thinking, well, Bill Gates and his system, they use our roads, they use our electrical lines, they use the assets that the people before him built up, and this is community credit. If you think about it, it doesn't belong to just one corporation. It belongs to us all, and that's why people have to understand the importance of cultural inheritance.
Thanks, Betty.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I'll just look at the time. It's 12:15, our time, and I'm going to wind it up because I know we're covering some good ground, but we've got another forum starting 3/4 of an hour. Lou Cook, you had your hand up.
Yes, Arnie, I'm just thinking while you were talking there, I read in a golf instruction book many, many, many years ago that when you're playing golf, you always play this shot so that with the result of that, your next shot will be easier. And I think this applies to us in our everyday life. Whatever we do now should always be to improve the position we're in so things are much better the next time we front up to whatever the problem is. I think that's pretty good to keep in mind. It means you've got to think ahead, but you'll fare much better as you go along. So you play the shot today that's going to make your life a bit better tomorrow.
Thank you, Lou. No worries. Thank you very much for that, Lou. I appreciate your engagement today. I'm going to wind us up, and so I'll say thanks to Betty Luks for attending the forum today and your significant contribution as always.
Well, I'll see you in 45 minutes.
That's it. Thanks very much, Lou. Okay, too easy. All right. And it's interesting too, before I close out with Waltzing Matilda, you bear in mind that when Banjo Paterson wrote Waltzing Matilda, it was late 1800s, 95, 98, whatever, 1898. It was after I think it was a shearers' strike. It was after the 1890s. I think there was a depression, and he wrote it on the basis that there were the swagmen. He's got his whole life sitting on his back. I know that some people interpret the swagman as possibly his bride, but I'm not convinced. I believe that he is a swagman because his bed is on his back, and he just goes from hand to mouth with his food supply. And okay, he's got a billy, and he boils it to make some sort of tea. I mean, the man is destitute. I think it was Los Angeles was mentioned yesterday, day before. 90,000 homeless people in that. What was, we're talking California here. It's just this is the 8th largest economy in the world. 90,000 homeless people, and 50% of the US economy is based on building weapons. I think that's just disgraceful, when they could be doing so much more. And that's policy and administration. This is why, if it comes down from the top and it's the monopoly capitalist, you've got to seriously look at it and say, is this a good thing, or is it only directionally, like free enterprise? To me, free enterprise is a lot different than monopoly capitalism, and we need to pursue both these things to understand them both. Anyway, Arnie Luks from the Crossroads signing out. There once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree, and he sang as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. Who'll come a waltzing